What if everything we think we know about pharaohs is wrong? What if they weren't just kings, but something else entirely? For thousands of years, we've been told that pharaohs ruled Egypt like monarchs. They wore crowns, led armies, built monuments. But look closer. They didn't call themselves king. They called themselves gods. They weren't just rulers of land. They were guardians of cosmic balance. They weren't crowned in a ceremony of politics. They were transformed in a ritual of divinity. So here's the question. Were pharaohs truly kings, or were they something far stranger? Tonight, we investigate the theories. Modern history books describe pharaohs as ancient monarchs, but that's a modern label. The word pharaoh itself originally meant great house, not a person, but an institution. And when you examine how the Egyptians saw their ruler, things become complicated. The pharaoh wasn't just a political leader, he was the living Horus, the son of Ra, the high priest of every temple, the bridge between heaven and earth. This wasn't symbolism in the way we use it today. To the ancient Egyptians, this was reality. And that opens the door to several powerful theories. This is beyond time. Imagine standing in a temple in ancient Egypt. The air is thick with incense. Priests chant in a language older than memory. The sun rises over the horizon, and as it does, a single figure steps forward, not a king, a god. To the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh was not appointed by divine will. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god of the sky. This was not metaphor. It was not symbolic poetry. It was literal belief. When a pharaoh took the throne, he did not merely inherit power. He transformed. In life, he was Horus. In death, he became Osiris, lord of the underworld, and his son would rise as Horus again, an unbroken divine cycle. This means something radical. Egypt did not believe it was ruled by a man. It believed it was ruled by a god walking in human form. And that changes everything. Because if your ruler is human, you can question him. If your ruler is divine, questioning him becomes cosmic rebellion. The pharaoh's role was tied to Ma'at, the sacred balance of the universe. Ma'at was not just law or morality. It was the force that kept the sun rising, the Nile flooding, the stars moving in order. If Ma'at failed, chaos, known as Isfet, would consume the world, and only one being was responsible for maintaining that balance, the pharaoh. Not the priests, not the army, not the people. The pharaoh alone stood between order and collapse. This wasn't propaganda in the modern sense. It was theology fused with survival. When drought struck, it reflected on him. When enemies invaded, it threatened cosmic order. When rituals were performed, they were done in his name because only he had divine authority. He wasn't powerful because he had an army. He had an army because he was powerful in the eyes of the universe. And here's the deeper question. Did Egyptians truly believe this? Most evidence suggests yes. Temples, inscriptions, daily prayers, royal titulary all consistently reinforce the same message. The pharaoh was not pretending to be divine. He was understood to be divine, which forces us to rethink the entire system. Because if the ruler is literally a god, then Egypt was not a monarchy. It was a theocracy centered on a living deity, not a kingdom, a sacred organism, and at its heart, a man who was no longer just a man. What if the pharaoh wasn't mainly a ruler, but a ritual machine? Look closely at temple walls across Egypt. You'll see the same image repeated again and again. The pharaoh offering incense, the pharaoh presenting wine, the pharaoh feeding the gods. Almost never a priest. Officially, every sacred ritual in Egypt was performed by the pharaoh. In reality, priests carried them out daily. But here's the key. They did it in his name, because only he had the authority to interact with the divine world. That wasn't political branding. That was theological law. The gods did not receive offerings from common men. They received them from the living Horus, which means the pharaoh's primary job may not have been governing people. It was governing the relationship between heaven and earth. He was the authorized bridge between dimensions. Without him, temples lost legitimacy, rituals lost power, the divine order weakened. So maybe the pharaoh wasn't just king. Maybe he was the central operator of a sacred system, not a monarch sitting on a throne, but the only human legally allowed to keep the universe running. And that's a very different kind of power. Here's where things become even stranger. What if the pharaoh wasn't really a person, but a role? When a new ruler took the throne, he didn't just become king. He took on 5 royal names. He adopted divine titles. He merged with Horus. He inherited centuries of sacred identity. His personal self began to disappear. From that moment forward, he wasn't simply a man named Amenhotep or a man named Ramses. He became Pharaoh, an office older than his own life. Think about that. The crown mattered more than the individual. The divine identity mattered more than the personality inside it. And when one pharaoh died, the role did not die with him. It transferred instantly, seamlessly, as if the body was temporary, but the office eternal. This suggests something powerful. The Egyptians may not have worshipped the man, they worshipped the position. The human inside the crown was replaceable. The sacred function was not, which means Pharaoh might not have been a king at all. He was a living mask worn by whoever occupied the throne, a vessel for an idea too powerful to belong to one person, and that idea was Egypt itself. So what were the pharaohs? Kings? Yes, but that word feels too small, because when you look closely, something unsettling appears. The pharaoh was not just a ruler, he was a god in flesh, a priest of the cosmos, a living symbol, a mask worn by power itself. And that changes the entire way we see ancient Egypt. Because if your ruler is divine, you cannot remove him without shaking reality. If your ruler maintains cosmic order, rebellion becomes the end of the world. If your ruler is the bridge between heaven and earth, his authority is untouchable. That is not monarchy. That is structural control at the deepest psychological level. The brilliance of Egypt was not just in pyramids or armies. It was in creating a role so powerful, so sacred, so fused with existence itself, that people didn't obey out of fear, they obeyed out of belief. The pharaoh wasn't just sitting on a throne, he was embedded in the architecture of reality. And maybe that's why the system lasted 3,000 years, not because of strength, not because of wealth, but because Egypt convinced an entire civilization that without one sacred figure, the sun might not rise tomorrow. So perhaps the real question isn't, were the pharaohs kings? The real question is, was the pharaoh the most successful idea in human history?